And I think for a lot of people, being able to get to a point where they connect to their purpose, not just a job, has given them the freedom to experience life differently in a way of fulfillment, not just ticking a box to make sure my bills are paid. And I think that brings a different level of contentment that a lot of people have not experienced before. You got to retirement age, Marty. I didn't even get to 40.
Hi, Letitia, and welcome to Peace Unplugged.
Hi, Martin. I'm so excited to be here with you today. Thanks for having me.
Great stuff. Now, I came on your podcast before, didn't I? Which was nice to do. It was good
Yes.
fun.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Uh, so tell me about your podcast and tell me about your mission.
So my podcast is called Survival Mode Disrupted. And the premise of the podcast is to share stories around how people moved beyond the residual impact of trauma. My bigger mission is just that, bringing awareness to the residual impact of trauma. I myself was stuck for a very long time. And I wish that I was able to have raw, honest conversations with people, to bring more awareness to how I was stuck, which is why I now have this podcast and just share some really amazing stories of people taking radical ownership of their lives after a difficult period.
Tell me about your stuckness. When did you first become fully aware of that you were stuck and something wasn't quite right?
I've had periods of time where I've gone through some really traumatic events, and I would say I soldiered on beyond those traumatic events. I've been molested. I was groomed and entered a abusive relationship from the age of 14. That I eventually married that man, uh, and he stabbed me. And beyond that, I've had abusive relationships with addicts, and I've been arrested. So the traumatic history goes on and on and on. But it wasn't until maybe 3 or 4 years ago when I began to write my memoir that I recognized how stuck I had been, although I would have championed that I survived and I was able to move forward. I think it was the reflection in hindsight that made me realize how much I had just been living in autopilot for most of my life.
So it was the writing, the journaling that actually kind of really gave you the aha moment, was it?
Yeah, it was
What
right
you
in
were
my
saying.
memoir, that I recognize, when you go back and you start processing these events that my brain had like compartmentalized and packed away. It was, wow, I really suffered for a long time and I just didn't know because I just soldiered on as if nothing happened.
So what happened immediately when you realised that? Did you have any kind of slow down time, or was there anything that happened that stopped you from doing anything for a little while, or did you just immediately jump into to did you have a when did you have a sense of when you knew what to do?
So my family and I were traveling full time for several years. And during that time is when I believe that I hit my wall. I was under a lot of pressure because I was the only one at the time, with an income. I was running a business, and I really couldn't enjoy traveling through Europe for over 2 years because I was only focused on business. And we got to Turkey towards the end of the journey, and I stayed in bed for nearly 2 months. I couldn't get out of bed. I didn't have the energy. I didn't have the desire. My family went out and explored Turkey and I could not leave. Literally, one day we got to the apartment that we were staying in. I went up to the 21st floor, and the next time I left that apartment was 2 months later when we were heading to the airport. And there was this reconciliation for me then that something had to change. And that was really when I started, like, really reflecting on my life and how the culmination of all the traumatic experiences is what had me stuck in that bed for literally 2 months. And so I started journaling. And as someone who's been through therapy over the years, I've worked with a coach. I myself am a coach. I had to just really unpack the tools that I already had, spend some time unpacking those tools and reminding myself of all of the healing that I had done along the way so that I can get myself into a place where I actually was back doing the things that I like to do and being impactful in a way that would serve not just me, my family, but the wider audience. And so I spent maybe the next 8 months really unpacking, and that looked like journaling, a really deep journal. I use GPT, like, to help me come up with some journal prompts, and I would spend hours just pouring out my soul, crying my eyes out, but really getting honest about the things that I had very easily stuffed away so that I could continue moving forward. And that's basically what brought me to the work that I do now. In that process, after I got to a place where I was functioning better, I got trauma informed, and I've spent now a good bit of time just educating myself around trauma and really understanding how it shows up in our bodies, how it shows up in our lives, in hopes that I can help other people navigate that.
Yeah, I really hear that, and I really understand that. So, during the time you were journaling, were you still taking therapy at the time, or were you doing this solo?
I was doing the journaling solo. I have a very large network, particularly on LinkedIn. And in the time that I was journaling, I started networking a lot. And in that process, being honest about the space that I was in, I met a lot of people that supported my journey, people that would check up on me, people that would send books recommendations or podcast recommendations. So I leaned heavily on the community around me. Um, I didn't formally go back to therapy because, like I said, I've been in therapy for decades. It's not that I didn't have the tools, I had to remind myself of the tools that I already had.
Yeah, so it's amazing, isn't it, what we can pick up and we can learn, and then it becomes a point where we kind of start to use those tools, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And I found that with the years I worked in substance misuse as a recovery worker, it's offering out those tools to people, and knowing that even though they didn't operate on them straight away, there's at some point people then make a decision they're going to start using it. They make up their mind that they're going to activate. There's always, always a great belief of mine is that you can't make people change. People change themselves when they're ready to. And as helpers or coaches or trainers or whatever that might be, that we're simply the conduit to give people, offer people the opportunity to to engage in those tools and start to recover. It's really interesting you were saying about that you found that LinkedIn community and that a community, so a group of people online, I guess, to a large extent, or I guess, those sometimes work in real terms, face to face terms, that you get that support from a number of people. And that can be really encouraging, can't it?
Absolutely. And one of the things that I often talk about on my podcast is just that, like, community. When you're really ready to heal, when you're really ready to do all the things, I think community is so important. I think one of the residual impacts of trauma is that we tend to silo ourselves. We suffer in silence. We think no one will understand. And oftentimes it is the community that we build, recognizing that we aren't alone, that actually helps us take back control of our lives.
So that helps you build confidence.
Absolutely. It reminded me of who I was. Because I had been very active prior to that point where I could not get out of bed. I had a lot of people reaching out to me during that period, like, where are you? What's going on? Because I had been very vocal online, and that was before I started the trauma recovery. I have a market research business as well, so I worked very closely with a lot of coaches over that period. So me now, out of the blue, going silent, and people reached out. People were like, what's going on? I haven't seen you online. And that encouraged me, once I was able to get grips with myself and actually realize what was going on. It encouraged me to reach out more because I felt seen. Even in my silence, I felt seen. And that was really, really instrumental in helping me, really just take back control.
It's funny, it's amazing as if we need to know we're alive, don't we, Letitia?
Hmm.
I go on about this all the time. It's about listening to people, listening with curiosity, and and not listening to give necessarily any advice unless we're actually invited to do so. So this, because I think if I think what a lot of perhaps coaches and therapists and all sorts of helpers and support workers fall into this habit of wanting to advise people or wanting to fix people, and that's understandable because I think we've all been at that point, and then it gets to a point when we kind of realise that actually it's not about us actually fixing people, and actually what is that all about? Is that all about us, or is it about the person we're trying to help? So if you have to turn it on your head,
You,
don't you?
yes. Well, Martin, they do say helpers tend to have big egos. And it's not that obvious all the time, right? But a lot of time, helpers or people who are offering support, th- it makes them feel good about themselves as well. And being in this space, it's about creating a safe space for others. And I myself had to learn how to ask permission, even in regular relationships. And I heard things, and you want to listen. I have a solution for you. But I think, you have to learn to ask permission. I always ask, are you telling me this because you just want to vent, or are you open to solutions?
Yeah,
And if they just want to vent, I keep my opinions and my tools and everything else packed away. But I think you're right. Sometimes when we are in these spaces, particularly when we understand how dire someone's circumstances can be from I say, a very point of view, we want to step in and help. But permission is key.
yeah, absolutely. It's one of the key ways that I've tend to work with people is just to listen and to paraphrase and to give back. If you were talking to me about something and I'd say, "Okay, Letitia, I hear you saying this. Have I got that right? Yeah, am I understanding you correctly?" So it's acknowledging or attempting to understand, or understanding from our own point of view, but also sharing that as well. So it tends to help people to. It helps us to connect as human beings, doesn't it? When we speak in that way,
Yes, absolutely.
it's about building rapport, isn't it?
Yes. And that safe space, because oftentimes people just don't have it. a safe space to express themselves and be seen and heard in an authentic way.
Absolutely. So when did you start your podcast then, Letitia? How long ago did you start that?
It kicked on June 1st.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember it was around about the time that I got in contact with you and we talked, discussed about it and started doing some recording, wasn't it?
Yes, I had just started recording when you were probably like my seventh interview. Um, and it, everything went quite quickly. When I started the podcast, I thought, okay, I'll release stuff once a week. Before I even launched, I had over 60 episodes recorded, and I was like, ooh, I'm gonna have to reconsider how I'm releasing these.
That sounds like a really good way of doing it, is getting that money in advance. I mean, I must admit, I didn't. I kind of just threw myself in when I first started and um, didn't do too much in the way of preparation.
Yes. It,
So,
it it
so
makes it
what?
easier for me, because I'm also managing another business. I homeschool my kids, and I have a full-time job. So rather than every week, like, oh, I need a guest, I need five guests now. It, it's better to have a couple in the basket for use.
Yeah. So how do you manage all of that, Letitia? How do you manage that? You full-time job, children, and running a business and running a podcast. How do you organise your time?
I will say, I am very grateful that my job is 100% remote. So I do not lose any time commuting. Obviously, it allows me to be home with the kids. My kids are quite young, so it's not like we're spending 4 hours a day in the learning environment. And the way that I've structured the way that they learn is they lead it. For instance, when we first started, my youngest was one, and people say, "Oh, you're homeschooling at one." Yes, we had a structured system from one, and she was obsessed with dinosaurs at the time. So everything we did was around learning the dinosaurs that she was so obsessed with. Um, it makes it fun for them, and then they tell me what they want to learn while I integrate everything that they need to learn as well into it, which has made it fun for everyone. My youngest also likes music heavily, so I spend a lot of time making up songs, not great ones, but that's the way she learns. So I in the mornings, because of the work that I do is very routine. I work for a transit company, so I am responsible for all of the public transportation information for certain cities, and it's very routine. I'm able to slip in things in between the work that I have to do. Lunch times is usually devoted to editing or content creation. And afternoons are really busy for me with work because a lot of my cities are in the US. But evenings, it will feed the children, do a couple of recordings, get the streaming out, and I'm usually finished by 9. So, I'm very routine. I know what I need to be doing at any given time, and I just go ahead and do it.
You come across as really passionate, and that sounds like it gives you the impression that that passion feeds your energy.
It does. I think when you are doing things that you love, you never work a day in your life.
Yeah, I've come to realise that since I've retired. On a personal level, I found that I'm doing this. I can spend more hours than I spent in full time work and not feel anywhere near as tired as what I used to feel. And I think sometimes realization that sometimes of us we get into an employment situation where it can be okay to start with and then kind of lose focus, lose it doesn't maybe doesn't fit with values in some ways, in some of the ways the workplace operates.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. prior to starting my market research business, I was a business coach, and my focus was helping people leave the corporate world and go full time in their business, because so many people during that time were very unhappy. And, one of the things that I always say, I think COVID created this conscious awareness that there is more to life than the routine. And I think for a lot of people, being able to get to a point where they connect to their purpose, not just a job, has given them the freedom to experience life differently, in a way of fulfillment, not just ticking a box to make sure my bills are paid. And I think that brings a different level of contentment that a lot of people have not experienced before. You got to retirement age, Marty. I didn't even get to 40. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, I can't do this anymore.
Well, I'm not actually official retirement age.
Right, you did take early retirement. That's correct, but
I took it early because I think if I hadn't taken it, uh, I'd have just made myself very ill. It would have happened, and it's that realization. The other thing, that's interesting thing about that is I love the idea, and I'm sitting in a position now where I made that decision. I was able to do that, and I was in a position to be able to do that. However, that was due to some other circumstances. But for a long time, I felt very trapped because I had financial commitments, because I still had a mortgage, and I still had some loans and bits and pieces, and I desperately wanted to get out of what I was doing and find something else. But it was difficult to do that because of the financial commitments. Just I'm looking at asking you your experience as a coach is how you help somebody navigate out of one of those situations. If I was speaking to you, let's say 7 years ago, in a position I was in, what sort of ways uh, would you have been encouraging me to look at, to navigate out of that? Because it would have been possible to have done that at that time, but I was fearful. I was scared. I'd done something like it before and fallen flat and got myself in a lot of debt. So I was terrified of getting into debt again. I'd just be interested to know, because there may be people out there watching and listening that may be in that position.
absolutely. Um, when I worked with clients, one of the first things we really took a lot of time to unpack is what they believed their purpose to be. And that came alongside of getting clarity around their core values, and then doing an analysis of how aligned the work that they're doing now is with their core values. And I think for a lot of my clients, seeing that the work that they did was not necessarily aligned with the core values or what they believed their purpose to be, shifted a lot of things for people. Or maybe people hadn't considered even what their purpose is. They're just on this, what I call a conveyor belt of success, right? You get a good education, you do your best to get a great job, and then you work really hard to advance through this job. But what if your purpose wasn't on that conveyor belt? And oftentimes there is a lot of fear associated with stepping off of what is known, or the social expectations, stepping outside of the social expectations. But I think once you are clear about your values, once you are clear about what you believe your purpose is, it's easier to define what your actions can be when you now are saying, wow, I want to stay focused to these values. I want to stay focused to this purpose. And for some of my clients, it meant getting a new job that might have been more aligned while they worked on their business, so that they felt more aligned in life. And I think it's all about taking inspired and aligned action. And that helps eliminate some of that fear, because oftentimes, our first attempt at even business, we haven't worked out those two things, our values and our purpose. We often go into situations where, oh, I can make money here, but making money isn't everything for everybody. And I think when you can get to that place, or where you and I seem to be, where we're really aligned and fulfilled, that's when, again, it doesn't seem so taxing on us emotionally, spiritually, even physically at times. And we find more fulfillment even in failure, because we're moving in a direction that feels aligned with us at our core.
Yeah, that's one thing, listeners, watchers here. I really would like folks to take that away. There's two very, very clear messages: the core values and having a purpose in our lives. I tend to think of those, people often used to talk about it as goals, or I kind of like to use the word outcomes. If you use the word outcome, it it's a presupposition that it's going to happen. But whereas a goal can be something that can be missed. But I also like to use the metaphor of it being like plasticine. So you
Mhm.
can you pay attention to it, and you can mould it into something else. We may have an idea about what purpose and our goal might be, and that may change over time. So, but if you leave it alone, it'll go brittle and it'll crumble. So I changed careers a couple of times in my working time. When I moved into the sort of the more social work side of it, at the time, I came to realise that that's kind of what some of my core values were and what I was meant to do. But over time, that changed. Over time, I think I probably did that and did it as far as I could do it, and then I needed something else. Now I feel I just needing the freedom to be able to explore, to be able to um, learn and gain wisdom at my own rate and my own time, without having to be sort of told you've got to do it this way, you've got to do it that way. And I think that's probably for those that are going into entrepreneurship is I wonder, would you agree with me that for people that are seeking that way, is they're looking to do something, if they're doing it for their own core values, and they're seeking to find their own way, rather than just going through the motions of just doing what someone else is telling us to do.
So,
In my
you know, there
Yeah.
there is a big difference, in my opinion, between an employee and an entrepreneur, or and it starts with mindset. And I'm going to take it back to a place that's unexpected, but it starts in the school system, right? The school system was created to make good employees. So that the mindset shift, that group thought that there's only one or two ways to the final answer, is ingrained in us from about 5 years old. And we carry that through employment, we carry that into entrepreneurship. And if we don't challenge that mindset, that's often why a lot of people are in a space where, they're unhappy. Like, okay, I have the freedom, I have the money, I'm making the money, but for some reason, I still feel empty. That's because they're not found their own way. They're following, again, that conveyor belt of success that's been laid out. And I think the beauty in entrepreneurship is being able to peel that back and really challenge whether or not your actions are aligned, right? Like there may be things that you did in your career that you can say were not part of your core values, right? But the great thing about being an entrepreneur, the great thing about doing your own thing is that you get to challenge that. And you don't have to do those things in your business if you don't want to. So there is a huge shift that needs to happen. But if you can lean into that alignment and being able to question yourself continuously along the way, because I think that's what's needed to make sure that we shift into alignment and be okay with doing things your own way, because for some people that's the part that's uncomfortable. A lot of people come into this space wanting a blueprint. They want to follow somebody else's path, but as we know in business, everything's different. Like this could work for somebody over here. It won't necessarily work for you because of the way that you show up different. Your values may be different. Your personality may be different. So it is being comfortable with the discomfort of not knowing it all. Whereas if you've been in a career for 20 years, it's very little you don't know about your process, right? But you have to be open to defining that. And for a lot of people, that is the part that's uncomfortable.
I agree with you about the school system, and I think for a lot of people, the schools are set up that the whole system of school, from the hierarchy of it, it tends to end up being more about the success of the school than it is about the pupil, than it is about the student. So it's all about you must pass this exam. I mean, I couldn't pass exams to save my life when I was at school, and I think that was probably part of my what I now know is a bit of neurodiversity. I just wasn't able to sit there for an hour and focus and concentrate on things that I knew the answers to, but could not bring them to my mind at the moment I sat in front of a piece of paper, and that was a great that great creates a great lack of confidence when you don't pass the exam or you get a poor result. Then I went off to college, and same sort of thing happened. And there was no real guidance in those days. I'm talking back in sort of the 1970s, 1980s. There was no real guidance that people know about now about the innermost ways of the way people's minds work, and about ways of learning, and also about sort of pushing people into boxes. Okay, you must do this, you must do that. It's a big
And if you don't,
successful.
you're labeled.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there were things that I wanted to do when I was younger that my parents was, oh, you don't want to be doing that. Oh, and then it was, you must do anything because it's this drive. You must be successful. But what is success? Is it?
It's
It's
very
I think success is it success is possibly when we achieve what we want to achieve rather than what other people expect us to achieve.
with every client, whether it's been market research, the business coaching, now the trauma recovery, every time I've worked with clients, the one thing that I have emphasized is defining your own version of success. And I think that's key because we are often given this, like, this is what success looks like. It's almost like this poster board that we all have seen before. This is what success looks like, and if you don't follow this, you're not successful. And it's demoralizing for a lot of people because again, it's not aligned with their values, it's not aligned with their purpose, but there's so much pressure on us from a societal perspective to show up in this way. And I think now that we have more knowledge around neurodiversity, and I think it opens up the door a lot more. I think there's a lot more compassion in that space, in some respects, that okay, everyone learns differently, or everyone processes differently, and those things need to be accounted for. But I mean, previously I was uh, highly gifted, growing up in an environment that didn't support that. And there was a period of time in my youth that the educational system wanted to skip me 3 grades, and my mom was like, no, no, I don't want her around people that much older than her. Um, I was probably about 10, and they wanted to put me into, you know, around teenagers, and my mom was like, no. So they kept me at my grade, and I was very bored because I was well advanced. They didn't provide any other solutions other than, well, if you're here, you have to learn here. But I knew that stuff. So what does a bored child do? Like, come on, any parent out there? They find something to keep them occupied. And I got labeled as this problem child, as this, menace, because I was bored. And very recently, interestingly enough, Marty, I posted a picture of my children online on Facebook. And one of my teachers said, oh, they look just like you, but hopefully they're better behaved. I responded, no, my children are being raised to be just as disruptive as their mother, because well behaved women really make history. But even this is 25 years later, 30 years later, I'm still being labeled as a misbehaved child when I'm brilliant. And that's not to toot my own horn, but it was dismissed because I didn't fit into the boxes that kept everyone else around me comfortable. And now look, my ability to speak my mind, my ability to assert myself now serves the people that I show up for. It serves a purpose, but people spent years trying to take that part of me out of me to make them comfortable.
Yeah, that's so true. I was watching a few months ago a documentary about the artist Tracy Emin. I mean, she happened to live very local to where I'm located. I'd never actually met her. I think she was about the same age as me, and she went to different schools. But she was very much at school known as a bit of a wild child. But of course, one thing that she was talented in was art, and she testified to the fact that whilst being excluded from class at times or having one-to-one tutoring or whatever it was, that one of the teachers had identified that what her strength was art. So just let her get on and do it, and do what and engage in her passion. As a result of that, we now have one of the most famous contemporary artists in this country, or probably in the world. And she's certainly a disruptor. I mean, her art is very challenging. I wouldn't say it's not necessarily my kind of art, but that's not the issue. The issue is the fact that what she's done is she's made a success of her art, and she learned to, obviously became must have been in some sort of way an entrepreneur about it, and she's revered now as in that way. So who says that she's not? She's became a success despite being seen as disruptive
Disruptive.
at school. So I just wonder. I was just thinking as you were telling me you were you were testifying about your own experience. That's kind of what made me think of Tracy Emin in that kind of way. That actually is it. who are who are these teachers to necessarily tell us that we've got to do things in a certain way? And to be fair, that if they're employed to do a job as a teacher and to teach in a certain way, then that's the kind of thing that we do, isn't it? There's little room for that ability to be expressive. Some teachers are. I think some teachers do kind of go off piste a little bit, and their passion comes out in a different way. But to a large extent, it's this kind of right. You must do this, and you must do it in this way. Even the school uniforms. I don't agree with these everybody dressing in the same school uniform and all trying to look like automatons. Like that. What's wrong with allowing people to express themselves? I know there's the argument about some kids are better off than others, but I still think actually kids still are able to express themselves in their own way according to their own values by what they've got. And actually, if you do that, the the kind of the sort of the wearing the latest trainers or whatever doesn't really. Perhaps kids can then learn that actually that doesn't really matter too much.
Mhm.
It's not the most
You know,
important thing.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And as you're saying that, it's part of the system. They strip you of your individualism again because we're making a good employee. And a good employee isn't someone who stands out for the wrong reasons, right? But then we spend the next 20 years trying to find our individualism and trying to find what makes us different and being comfortable with that. And I just challenge people to just think about what we're doing to children, you know, um, and how what it did to you as a child. Most of us don't find ourselves until we're in our late 30s, early 40s, and that's because it was condemned to be different. But what makes us human is our differences, is our ability to process things and look at things differently. That creates the imprints of our society. And we tend to just strip this away from children, to keep them compliant, without the long term thought of the impacts of that. And that, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I homeschool. I don't want to put my children through that. And while there are days and I'm like, oh, why can't they just fall into place? I love the fact that they know what they want. They are completely authentic to themselves. And I don't think that they're going to spend 20 years having to find themselves as a result.
I agree with you. And again, I reach out to listeners and to people that are viewing this is to love to know. I'm really keen to know what other people think about these things. We put this material out. I might be 61, but I'm still willing to learn new things. I'm still willing to. I'm fascinated by people. I want to understand what makes people tick and what makes people perhaps successful or how they define their success. And again, ultimately, I'm going to come back and say to you, Letitia, um, in your life, what brings you peace?
What brings me peace is being able. I fought for a long time to be me. My trauma made me a people pleaser. A trauma made me a overachiever. I've spent a lot of time getting comfortable with who I am, and because I was taught from a very young age that I couldn't be me. So being able to show up in a space and help others, um, being 100% authentic brings me a lot of peace. I was labeled for being disruptive in school, And now I have labeled myself the disruptor, the survival mode disruptor. And that's because of my ability to heal, but also my ability to lean into what makes me me. And it took me a very long time to get to this place. And that in itself is peace. Another element of peace for me is being able to provide my children with a disruptive upbringing, and not in a negative way, like being able to introduce them to the world without labels, without constraints, without the need to conform. um Brings me a lot of peace as well. And it means a lot to me to be able to homeschool, even though it's tiring, people, it's so tiring. But when I look at the growth my children have, and we were able to travel for years, and the way that they interact with people with so much confidence and surety of who they are without even really knowing yet, that just makes me so happy, and it brings me peace as well, because I feel like I am breaking cycles by leaning into authenticity. And yeah, that's who I am. And it it just makes me grateful to be in this space.
That is fabulous. I'm going to reiterate what you said. So what brings Letitia peace is being in authenticity. So that's something, I think that's something that we can all reflect upon uh, with ourselves, and about whether, whether whether that fits with our values, or maybe not. For some people, it might not do. But well, having said that, that's almost an oxymoron, isn't it? Because if we're being authentic, then actually we are recognizing about who we are and about our differences and about the way we think, and being true to ourselves. Okay, Letitia, this has been wonderful to talk to you again, and it's been quite a different experience, I think, this time.
Yes. No, I'm doing all the talking, Marty. I've enjoyed the conversation as well, and thank you for having me.
Okay, that's fabulous. So I wish you continued success in what you do. I follow, I do try to follow some of what you're doing, and listening to people. Um, just, just as at the end here, just give the opportunity, Letitia, is to promote what you do, and how people can contact you, and where they can find you.
Absolutely. Thank you. So, my name is Letitia R. Francis. I have labeled myself the survival mode disruptor. I am a trauma recovery mentor that facilitates unapologetic, disruptive transformations for women who are ready to exit survival mode. I have the survival mode Exodus membership. It's a monthly membership. Um, I also have the Survival Mode Exit Plan, which is a book sold exclusively through my website. And then there is the Survival Mode Disrupted podcast, which we've spoke about. And if you want to learn anything more about me, you can go to my website, LetitiaReneeFrancis.com, LetitiaReneeFrancis.com. You have information about the membership, working with me one to one, my podcast, as well as my book.
Thank you, Letitia.
Thank you.
Folks, follow on to Letitia. Look out for the material she puts out, because it's always interesting. There's always something to learn, something to gain some more wisdom with. And thank you for being on the show, Letitia.
Thank you for
We'll
having
see
me
you
again,
next time.
Martin. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, bye for now. If you enjoyed this podcast, please follow, like, and share. Thank you very much. Martin, Peace Unplugged.